Hello, everyone. I'm Melory Johnson, 25-year beauty veteran, consultant, and strategist. Welcome to Pretty Equity, where we tackle the real issues facing beauty founders and investors and bring you the answers from the experts behind the deals. Most investors entering the beauty category underestimate how regulated the industry actually is and how much documentation, proof, and planning is required just to get a product legally on the market. Compliance isn't red tape. Compliance isn't optional, but compliance is readiness, and readiness costs both time and money. For investors entering this space, understanding regulatory risk is essential. Missing documentation can delay launches for months. Misclassified claims can turn a cosmetic into an illegal drug. And regulatory shortcuts don't just slow brands down, they break deals. So joining me today is Anaïs from Taobē Consulting. Anaïs, am I pronouncing that correctly?
It was not the right name to be launching on the US market, I'm afraid. So it's Taobē Consulting. You were almost there, Melory. No worries.
All right, well, apologies for that. So it's Taobē Consulting. And Anaïs helps brands around the world navigate compliance, documentation requirements, and the complexities of cosmetic regulations. So together, we're going to unpack why regulatory isn't bureaucracy, it is strategy. Anaïs, thank you for being here. As you and I have discussed before, we have many newcomers to the beauty industry as of late, which is terrific since who doesn't love competition? But not all the newcomers are founders. Many are new to beauty investors too. Unfortunately, though, across the board, whether they're founders or investors, they just don't know what they don't know. Yes, there's a lot of money to be made in beauty, but there's also a lot of money to be lost if you don't know what you're doing. Anyway, one of the areas where they all seem to get tripped up is regulatory. Many founders and investors think regulatory means forms, filing, red tape, but in cosmetics, regulatory is actually about risk management. So, as a fellow consultant, how would you explain what regulatory actually is to someone entering beauty for the first time?
I agree with you when you say regulatory compliance is about risk management, because that is all that it is. I would define regulatory as the legal and safety due diligence that every product needs to meet before being available for sales on the market. In other words, it's a process that must be supervised by a safety assessor. And this person knows the regulation by heart. And this is going to be the person who says, this is approved and this is rejected. And this person needs to be involved from the very beginning at the time of R&D, formulation, and is going to follow the product throughout its development until it hits the market. So that's basically it.
So let's talk about documentation, because that was a conversation I wanted to have with you specifically. But not just documentation as in paperwork. I'm talking specifically as a strategic foundation. It's something most people who don't know better regard as just paperwork. Formulas, SDS, specs, testing data, but it's actually the backbone of compliance and manufacturing. In fact, I was just reading an article, forgive me, I don't remember where I found it, by Casey Culleney. She was talking about bridging beauty, and when big beauty looks for startup tie-ups. So she said in this article, global beauty innovation is often scaled by major companies, but many ideas start smaller. And corporate beauty is increasingly delving into a pool of startups to find industry's next big thing. What they were basically talking about, and she had interviewed some leaders from the L'Oreal Group and from Estée Lauder. And one of the things that caught my attention was an interview with Lucas Nannini, the VP of Fragrance Innovation at Estée Lauder, where he said, quote, "The reality is that priority number one is to make money. But the second is to save time. So when a major beauty firm onboards a new startup or wants to invest in a new idea, it has to be financially promising, win time, and optimize resources. And this is what got me thinking about documentation, because that's exactly what we're about to discuss. Winning time, avoiding unnecessary delays, and all of that can come from not having what you need. So from your point of view, can you explain why brands must have documentation up front and why hunting it down later can set them back months, as I just read? And
Of
that, by the
course,
way, is a major red flag for big beauty investors.
yeah, let's talk about that because this is so interesting. But first, I'm going to explain why collecting documents is so important. So I just said that prior to placing a product on the market, the product needs to follow and to go through a safety evaluation performed by a safety assessor. What this safety assessor is going to do is check the toxicological profile of each ingredient included in the formula. To be doing that, this person will need to receive the documents, which are basically the identity card of each ingredient. So for each raw material, the safety assessor is going to need the MSDS, the certificate of analysis or specifications, the breakdown, because one raw material doesn't equal always one inky ingredient. Sometimes a raw material is composed of several ingredients, and non-animal testing. That's the very basic set of documents that each raw material needs in order to be assessed by a safety assessor. So that's four documents per ingredient when you know that the average product includes between 20 and 30 ingredients per formula. So that's many, many, many documents that you will need to collect. So that's first, this is a big chunk. This is a big work that is going to need to be performed. Second is, so why does it take time to actually get the documents? I would explain this by several reasons. First, because there are many people in the line of getting the documents. So brands usually ask documents to their manufacturers, who would then ask them to their raw material suppliers. Everybody's very busy, as you know, and nobody's getting paid to provide documents. So that's always a task that is, left out to when you have time. And a second reason on why it takes so much time to receive the documents is that it's a question of, I think, balance of power. So the manufacturer is going to provide you with what you want if you owe them money. So at the very beginning of the process, because you still owe them money, or because you're a big client and they want to keep you happy. If you don't owe them money anymore and you are a small client, then you can expect major delays whenever you're asking for the documents. So that's why we are always telling our clients to do that very early in the process at the time of working on the formula, so that the time it takes to create the formula, you are also collecting the documents, and this time is not taken up after when you are ready to launch. So yes, the document collection seems so obvious and so easy to manage, while it's a major problem, because contract manufacturers in general do not have a very organized way of collecting documents to their raw material supplier. It's a big work to keep documents organized, having the right nomenclature, making sure that all documents are up to date. This is a lot of work. So that's it. This is as stupid as it can be, if I may, but it is a major issue that brands definitely want to tackle early on in the process. And coming back to the major groups being interested in buying small startups or the next big thing, it's always a dream of many of our clients to be, to get in the eye of the major groups. There are many things and many reasons why big groups will want to have a look at your profile and to go deeper into knowing what you're capable of doing in terms of sales, but also in terms of compliance, as you were saying. And the thing is, if you have not taken care of the regulatory part before being audited by a major group, they are not going to buy you. Why? Because if nothing is ready yet, it's going to take way too more time to put everything in place than they have to offer.
No,
So
100%.
I'm afraid they will walk away. If you don't have this part clean and in order, you are going to miss your
Yeah.
chance, I'm
Yeah.
afraid.
Well, readiness is part of the picture. You know what I mean? When even you don't even have to be one of the big beauty investors. You can be a smaller investor. If you can clearly see, and we're going to touch on that a little later. But one of the things that you said here that I just want to emphasize regarding time and regarding saving time is when you're dealing with companies, like you said, they're going to prioritize their big customers, their important customers. And it's not to say that not all customers are important, but the reality is those who spend the most money with a company are going to be higher on the totem pole than those who are new to the company. And so for those founders who are new to beauty and just entering the beauty market now, watching this, one of the things that I want to emphasize is that if you don't get your documentation, or at least have the documentation conversation from the get-go with whoever's doing your regulatory, making sure that you're asking for everything as you're doing it, you know what I mean? If you're going back later, you might land up being the very last person in the queue because
Absolutely.
that, you know,
Absolutely.
the people who are going to be producing the documents for you, you know, maybe the very first time they've ever seen you. So, you know what I mean? Even though it's not intentional that you're not a priority to them, that's just unfortunately the reality.
That's it.
So, okay, so again, why this? Let's just continue on our conversation about why all this matters. You know, just for context, for investors, because it's important to know the whys. So, Anaïs, in your opinion, how should investors think about documentation in terms of time, cost, and operational maturity? Again, readiness, we touched on that a bit. And more importantly, what does missing documentation reveal to an investor about a brand and its readiness?
I think that the lack of document management translates an immaturity in the development of the brands. All brands that are well established and serious have integrated the documentation, the document collection early in the process and have established a clear path to keep them organized. Not having the right documents means months of delays during the regulatory compliance work because safety assessors simply cannot work without having received the certificate of analysis of an MSDS of all raw materials. They cannot work without having received data on the microbiology or the type of packaging in which the product is contained. So not having done the work that you are going to have to do anyway, early on in the process is going to cost a lot of the energy and delays, inevitably.
100%. Again, just, talking a little bit more about delays, because you and I both know that missing docs equals significant delays. And so when from your point of view, if you can explain or walk the viewers through what actually happens when a founder doesn't have documentation ready. And I know that you touched on a little earlier, but how long does a compliance discovery process actually take realistically?
I'll give you a striking example on how being ready with documents can change the course of events. One day, many years ago, we were contacted by a company that was active both in the cosmetics and pharmaceutical sectors. And they were in a hurry to have a safety assessment performed on their products. And I warned them, well, if it's your first time, that Usually, well, we go as fast as you go, so we can work as long as you have the documents. But usually, this part takes between 2 and 4 months if you're a first timer. And well, those people, they had experience from the pharmaceutical world, and I think that it was that which made the difference. They came back to us after a day with all documents. So we received the documents on Monday, and we performed the full safety assessment in 2 days. Wednesday was ready. Do you
That
understand
is,
how valuable this is to a
yeah,
product launch?
no,
If
that's
you can
amazing.
go to your safety assessor with the full set of documents saying, I need that, and maybe if you're not in a rush, maybe 10 days later you have your safety assessment, your product is ready to market
Yeah.
instead of 2 to 4 months, which is the average that we see with our clients in general. And usually our clients are not startups.
Yeah,
Startups
right,
can
right,
take
right.
forever, can take
Yeah,
6 months,
yeah,
a
yeah,
year,
yeah, yeah.
just because of this document collection.
Yeah. No, no, I mean it's crazy. And I've seen brands just because they don't know,
Yeah,
some startups,
ignorance.
some new indie brands, because obviously who we're talking to now, specifically, are the new to beauty, investors and founders. So I mean I've literally seen startups who've put all the work into getting in front of Sephora, Ulta, Target. And the work that goes into doing that. You know how hard it is for them to get a yes. Yes, we're interested in you. Yes, we like your concept. Yes, let's go for it. Then they have a deadline because remember, B&M, brick and mortar, you there's no wiggle room. There's no second chances. A
Mm-mm.
yes with Sephora, and then you come back to them and tell them you've got a 4 to 6 month delay because you were not prepared. You didn't know to ask for documentation, let alone, other things that could possibly go wrong. And, let's not get started on, raw ingredient lead times because that's a conversation for another day. But yes, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see, the things that can go wrong when people are just not ready, when the brand really isn't ready, but they have put so much work into getting the yes from, you know what I mean? The
This,
Sephora's or the
what a
or whatever
tragedy.
B&M.
What a
It,
tragedy.
it's very sad. It's very sad.
And
Um,
we were speaking about the big groups wanting to acquire some beauty
mhm,
brands, but it's actually the same. If you have the ambition to be sold at Ulta, Sephora, etc.,
mhm,
those people are going to ask you if your products are compliant, and they are going to ask you proofs of it.
mhm, mhm,
And if you don't even know what that means or what they're actually looking for,
mhm,
chances are that you are going to get a no down the road
mhm.
just
And it
because
and
of
it
that.
is it is also worth noting that this problem, documentation, which is specifically why I wanted to talk to you about it today, is not just a new to beauty problem. This is a problem for people who've been doing this for a long time.
I
You know,
know.
um, most should know, most do know, but for
Hmm.
some reason or other, there are still those people who just, documentation in their minds are just a check the box paperwork. And it can be, what I mean, so much worse than that. So let's just talk a little bit about risk. So in the beginning, we had mentioned that, regulatory is fundamentally about risk management. And we've spoken about delays and we've spoken about all of that, but I want to look and explore the legal and operational risks that are involved because there are other risks of incomplete and inconsistent documentation that is beyond compliance. And like I said, I'm asking this question because I want the audience to understand that documentation isn't just paperwork. We're talking about things like traceability, claim substantiation, and even global market access. So, Anaïs, from your perspective, can you speak a bit more to the legal operational risks specifically?
Absolutely. So we are still coming back to the very basic elements that a product needs to hit the markets, which are having a safety assessment performed, having compliant labels, and being notified or listed on the FDA platform. Those are the three elements that any product will need to even hit markets. It is impossible to perform a full safety assessment without having received the full set of documents, and that those documents are consistent with each other. That means that for the same raw material, we will need to receive the documents from the raw material supplier. So many times we receive an MSDS from this supplier, the certificate of analysis of this supplier, because people think, well, it's the same ingredients. Well, no, because each manufacturer has its own way of and method of manufacture of the ingredients. Some heavy metal could be involved in the creation of a raw material by the way it was manufactured. That's why the documents need to come from the raw material supplier. This is a simple, knowledge to have, just to avoid, inconsistencies in the set of documents that you are going to create. And it's actually, there are some points to always bear in mind that are very simple to understand. And when you get them, document collections is pretty easy in the end. It's a long process because you have to ask documents to many different people and follow up again and again because people have other fish to fry, I'm afraid. But there will simply be no safety assessment possible, which means no way to access the market legally if the documents are not complete and or inconsistent. If imagine the product is placed on the market anyway, and that authorities inspect it, there will be a risk for the brand to pay heavy fines and even to recall the product. Those are the risks, and they exist.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, again, like we were saying about, legally. And I mean, things like traceability, these are post-market issues. But your job, my job, doesn't end at the finished goods. You know what I mean? Because again, we're talking documentation. So let's talk a bit about traceability. Why does that even matter to brands? I mean, claim substantiation, yes. I mean, at this point, people understand that if you're going to say something, you know what I mean? You're going to make a claim, you have to back it up. You have to be able to show and substantiate that claim. Fine. And we've even spoken about we haven't spoken so much about global market access, you know what I mean? Because, but I think people are smart enough to know that every region has its own regulatory, requirements. A good example is in the United States, SPF is considered an OTC, an over-the-counter drug. So the documentation, the testing involved, et cetera, is a little different than Europe, where they consider SPF a cosmetic. That's just an example. But let's talk about things like, post-market. So let's talk about traceability. What does that even mean? I mean, why should if you're doing everything right, the FDA is not going to come after you. You know what I mean? The authorities at B, they're not going to be coming after you. So why should you care? This is where documentation again plays a part in things like traceability. So if you could speak a little to that.
Well, this is more of a common sense, I think. Authorities and people assessing a product need to know everything about the products, which means also where every raw material comes from, who manufactures it, how is it manufactured, when is it, where is it produced. Those are very important, and they will be more and more important at a time where sustainability becomes such an important subject and topic to talk about, and that matters for consumers. In Europe, it's in the tracks now, but we are going to have to create a digital product passport for every product, which is also going to be giving like a score, a sustainability score to products, so that consumers know if they are consuming a product which is local or not at all. So products that are imported from China will have a bad score, while products made in France, made in a French laboratory, sold to French consumers will have a very, a green score to sustainability. Those are part of the traceability process that is in place, and that's a matter of transparency as well.
Yeah, and I think just the other thing to throw in for people who are new to this, the documentation is also there in case something goes wrong from an audit standpoint. So, you want to be able to show whoever's auditing you from whatever agency that you have done the work and that you are compliant and you have the documentation to prove it. But just on another note, just to throw out to the audience, you'd mentioned a few times safety assessors. So if anyone watching wants to learn a little more about safety assessors and safety assessment, there is another episode. You can just DM me on LinkedIn and I can send you the link for an episode specifically about safety assessment and safety assessors, because they don't exist necessarily in the United States. Safety assessment does, but the safety assessor doesn't. So, okay, so sorry, went down a bit of a rabbit hole there, but let's move over to due diligence. I want to discuss due diligence for a minute. So for investors who are still in the DD process, in other words, they're still evaluating a brand, which documents should they ask to see immediately to avoid slowdowns, costly, surprise costs or regulatory failures? So just those that they would want to see upfront.
That's a tricky question, because it will mean that the brands will be willing to disclose some very confidential information, but in case they agree, investors should ask for the safety substantiation dossier, which is needed to be able to place a product on the US market, or the product information file, which is very common here in Europe. That is the full dossier, including all the documents from all raw material and the finished products, plus the tests for the finished product and the claims, including the safety assessment. So that's the full identity card of a product. Now, if an investor wants to have a better idea on where a brand stands in terms of regulatory affairs, they should ask if either the brand has a regulatory department, which is very rare for smaller structure, or at least if they have the help of a regulatory consultant. So that's something that they absolutely need to ask and to make sure that there is something in place. Then, to go a step further, investors should ask if the formula have been reviewed by a safety assessor and on which market the products are compliant. And then if a safety evaluation has been performed by a safety assessor, and that's the safety assessment that we know here in Europe, and the safety substantiation that now, thanks to MOCRA, there in the US. Those are really the basic questions that investors should ask to brand founders, just to get an idea on where they stand in terms of regulatory affairs.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, all of those things are just, and again, sorry, I didn't complete my thought there, but I just want to say that, the US, and a lot of what we're talking about here is EU specific, but I don't think there are a lot of brands that are intending to be, in one region only. Most brands who, are serious about longevity do take into consideration that they may want to be in both the EU and US markets. So, this is why things like safety assessors, safety assessments are important. But either way, if you're just going to be in the United States, all of these documentation will still be available to you. You're just not going to be getting them from your safety assessor per se. You know what I mean? Your regulatory team will have all of these documents and should have all of these documents available for you in their packet or dossier.
Definitely,
So
because the FDA requires now that you need to prove your product is safe. So how are you going to do it? Thanks to the documents that you are
yeah,
going to collect along the
yeah.
way.
100%, 100%. And that was exactly what I was just saying. It may not have a specific name. In other words, it hasn't been audited by an assessor, but all of those documents are still exactly the same, whether they're here
Definitely.
or anywhere
And
else.
even more because um, in the United States, you now have California who has its own rules.
Mhm.
You have the
Yeah,
state of
yeah,
Washington who
yeah,
has its
yeah,
own rules. So it's adding up every
yeah,
time to the
yeah,
set of
yeah,
documents that teams need to collect.
yeah. And I mean, it's a good point that you brought up because it's something also that, people, don't realize, particularly people new to the US, not just new to beauty, is that in the United States, every state is governed independently. So
Mm-mm.
every state is governed as if it were its own country and it has its own regulations. The state of Florida has very different regulation cosmetic and drug than California. Prop
Mm-mm.
65 is a California regulation. It's not a Florida or an Idaho, or Tennessee regulation. So it's really, really important that not only do you have regulatory teams in each region that understand. So in the US, your regulatory team will understand each and every regulatory requirement in each state. In the EU, your regulatory team will understand each and every regulatory requirement in every country because some
Thank,
countries are also regulated differently.
thank God, in Europe, we were smart for once, and the regulation covers 31 countries at once. You sometimes have small differences depending on the country, but they are very minor. So once your product is registered in France, it will be okay in Poland. It will be okay in Spain or Portugal. But in the US, well, each state doing their thing very differently is a headache, I'm
Yeah.
afraid.
Look, I mean,
Um,
MOCRA, the idea is that MOCRA is here to give an overall guideline so that
mhm.
we're all and to your point, for the most part, it's the same.
It's okay.
It's the
Mhm.
same. It's about safety, it's about quality, and first and foremost, it's about whether or not the product is safe for a consumer. That's the overall idea. The nuances here and there about sustainability or about, you know what I mean, what ingredients are acceptable or not acceptable. Okay, may change slightly from state to state, but overall, I think it's pretty much the same. So I want to pivot here. So I want to talk about a challenge I face constantly with founders, and that is OTC versus cosmetic claims. This
Mm.
is a massive problem, and one, quite frankly, I find incredibly frustrating. There are so many founders who stubbornly believe that just because their claim is backed by testing, they aren't using an OTC active or monograph, their product is still a cosmetic. I literally hear them say things like, but we tested it so we can claim it.
Mm.
And that is categorically false. And
Yes,
I'm sure you see it on a constant basis.
yes.
So, for those new to beauty who don't want to unburden themselves with this utterly false notion, can you please explain why claims alone can automatically make a product a drug regardless of formula intention?
Yes, because the formula of the product doesn't determine in which regulation a product is going to fall. It's the function of the product that is claimed on the packaging that determines the regulation that applies to it. I'm going to give you a very simple definition of what a cosmetic is, and this is the solution to all our problems, I think. If we stick to this definition, then things should go smooth. So the definition of a cosmetic is any substance applied on the external human body parts intending to clean, perfume, change appearance, keep in good condition, or correct body odor. That's it. Anything doing more than that makes the product fall into another category and another regulation. So that means that any function falling outside of this scope of the definition I just gave makes the product be regulated by another regulation. I'll give you a very concrete example based on our experience. We had a client selling perfumes many years ago, and they realized that the perfume they were using contained many allergens that were repelling mosquitoes. So they wanted to add on their labels, keep mosquitoes away. But we told them, no problem. But if you wish to add that claim, you will add another function to your product, which is not a cosmetic function, but a biocide one. So you will need to register your product as a cosmetic because it's a perfume and it has this function on the label, but also as a biocide. And it's a totally different registration process, of course. So sticking to the definition of a cosmetic should avoid, hopefully, many headaches in the future.
And it's interesting because the definitions, again, we've mentioned the differences between the US and EU. So in the US, obviously, the definition of cosmetics slightly differs to that of the definition in the EU. And so just to throw that out there for US listeners, the definitions are slightly different, but the overall idea is the same. So on the same note, on claims, to help clarify the issue a little further, why isn't testing what determines a claim's regulatory classification?
That's exactly the same thing. It's not because something is true that you can say it on the label of your product without it going to be considered something else than a cosmetic. Imagine you have an efficacy test saying that your product radically stops hair falling off. Mm-hmm. And it does that in 1 week. Well, it's marvelous. You want to claim that on the packaging. And if you do, it will make the product fall under the drug regulation because having hair falling down is a condition that needs a treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're curing. So anytime you're curing, you're treating, you're preventing, you're in the drug. Yeah, you're walking in the drug category. Okay, so let me ask you this. What are some of the everyday innocent sounding claims that you've actually seen that have crossed into drug territory? And more notably, what actually happens when they do?
I think one of the most common claims that our clients want to put on the packaging is anti-acne or clears acne, because people don't realize that acne is a skin condition and that needs treatment stronger than what a cosmetic would do. So in order to better navigate the complex world of claims, we always advise that people go back to the definition and play with words. So instead of saying, for example, anti-acne, you could say fights imperfections, because imperfections is not a skin condition. That falls into, the definition of beautifying again, and not using a specific word that can be treated as a condition, like hair loss, acne. Treatment cannot be used as a claim because if you treat, then you're using a drug.
Yeah.
So
like
playing with words, being creative with words is the best advice that we could give to brands and listeners today. And of course, be supported by an expert in cosmetic claims. That will make your life way easier than just navigating that by yourself and thinking, oh, is that a claim that I can make on my packaging, or is it going to be removed at the end of the process?
Yeah.
Be helped by an
And
expert.
yeah, no, 100%. And please, please, I just to anyone listening, just because somebody else does it doesn't mean you should. Please
No, and
don't
and
come and tell me, oh, well, they do it.
I
Well,
know,
no,
but on
they just
that
haven't been
note,
caught.
you don't know what their strategy was. Maybe they have registered the product as a drug,
Hmm. Hmm.
and maybe you don't want to go down that road because it costs so much, it's more complicated, etc. But maybe they went down that road and they are able to use the word treatment or acne,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's not a cosmetic.
No, 100%. And another thing that I touched on a second ago is that I asked, about what actually happens when people cross over the line, when they actually are registering themselves as a cosmetic and making drug claims, because I know that people know that their claims can get them into trouble. Like
Mm.
I think they know consciously, oh, you know what I mean? Look, somebody else is doing it, so we can do
Yeah,
it too, exactly like what we just said. But I'm not so sure, or at least I've come to realize over time that I don't think people understand what the trouble actually means. I mean, that there are serious consequences to illegal labeling. And
definitely.
again, just to be clear for US listeners, labeling in the US, at least, I'm not 100% sure about the EU, but in the US, labeling doesn't just mean what is written on your label. The FDA also considers labeling anything that you say about a product. So anything that you actually verbally say or you put in social media or anything that is, put out
On your
there
website,
from a marketing standpoint about your product, even if it's not physically written on the outside label, that the FDA considers labeling. Anyway, Anaïs,
definitely.
go ahead.
Same in Europe. What you claim to be that your product is doing is a marketing claim and is regulated as such. Circling back to the risk management that we were covering a bit earlier, claims is all about risk management. If you want to dare to go down that road and use a claim that is not a cosmetic one, you face two things: heavy fines or recall. And in both cases, you lose the trust of your consumer. Will you risk that? That's a simple question.
Yeah,
Are you
yeah,
willing to risk that?
yeah, yeah.
Is it worth
Look,
it?
I think that there are some things you can recover from as a brand, and there's other
Mhm.
things you can't recover from. There's some things that are just so reputationally harmful that there's no coming back. And again, if your intention is to be noticed by Big Beauty or to be noticed by an investor, is that really the risk you want to take?
The
You
big
know?
players are playing by the rules.
Yeah. No, no,
They
absolutely. Which is
should
why their
definitely.
well, just why
So
their legacy, you know?
exactly. And if you want to become a star, $1 million brand, you want to play by the rules, like all the
Yeah,
other brands are doing.
yeah. No, no, 100%.
As simple as
Um,
that.
yeah. So before we wrap this up, unless there's anything else you want to add here, I want to find out from you if you could give, let's just speak specifically to investors right now. Just
Mhm.
one piece of advice that you could give an investor before they decide to fund a new beauty brand.
Um, my number one tip, make sure that the brand you are trying to acquire has the help of a serious regulatory consultant. And if they don't, make sure that you bring someone serious to the table so that they can put themselves in order when scaling.
Okay.
They will need it sooner or later. If they are serious, they will need a regulatory consultant to help them with their regulatory affairs and compliance and safety of the product. So make sure that someone is already in place or impose someone.
Okay. And is your recommendation or your advice the same for founders? Even if they're small, what they can do to put themselves on stronger regulatory footing and avoid delays? Is your take stance the same?
Same. I would make sure that they choose a reputable regulatory consulting to guide them and help them avoid all the pitfalls related to compliance and regulation, because they simply cannot do without. I would also, of course, advise them to start early with the document collection and management, because being organized from the beginning and put processes in place will be of great help later on. And last but not least, I would ask their contract manufacturers if they are using a PML software, so product management lifecycle software like Coptis, for example, just to make sure that whenever they are formulating, they do the initial basic compliance check. So those would be a minor compliance check done by the manufacturer already at the time of formulation that would avoid many headaches later on. But anyway, in any case, they will need a regulatory consultant to help them out.
No,
So
that's I mean, that makes perfect sense. For the viewers and listeners, you're gonna hear regulatory consultants coming up over and over and over again, pretty much from everyone that we speak to. So hopefully, it will sink in and it will become something that you pay attention to first and foremost. Anaïs, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to discussing many more topics with you again. For all of those watching and listening, if you found this video valuable, follow me for more expert insights on the issues and answers that drive smarter beauty investment. I am Melory Johnson. See you next time.